And second, what I want to say is that this is the fourth session in this four-part series called Judaism's Perspectives on Connecting When Separated. And as usual, I would love to give credit to my co-conspirator, Mona Fishbane, who, what feels like a really long time ago, and I began to dream up this series, thinking how important it is for us to find connection and to see if connection works better than connectivity, and then to frame it by our text and tradition. And we've had some really very interesting sessions to this point. If you have not been a part of that, don't feel like you are lost the thread. Each one of these presentations are distinct. We started with Mona herself and was followed by Iska Waldman and Eliezer Diamond. And this week, I am really privileged and honored to, I shouldn't say introduce our rabbi, that would be a bit of a, I guess, overstatement.
No, anyway,
but I do want to say,
Okay.
yeah, good, thank you. I do want to say just a couple of things about our presenter this evening. We do know much about our rabbi, with whom we have now been so much a part of our lives since I believe 2011. And I had scrolled through his biography to see if there's really anything I didn't know. But really what I wanted to say is what I want to emphasize. Our rabbi has been so considerable in building our community. It is part of his bio, and I want to emphasize the point. I want to acknowledge that he has done that so very well. And the other part of his bio that I wanted to emphasize was his commitment to inclusion, which has really accelerated over the last year and has made us into an even more special community. In addition to that, I have made note, especially over the last week, in how our rabbi has shown a great deal of commitment to the greater Teaneck community, and that interfaith relationship and connection and commitment has been really important for each one of us to observe and to join him on, as well as to the state of Israel. Our rabbi is a board member and treasurer for Mazon, a Jewish response to hunger. He serves on the board of directors of Camp Young Judea Sprout Lake, and as a senior rabbinic fellow at the Sholom Hartman Institute in Israel, just more evidence of his commitment to and beyond us. And so it's really a pleasure, Rabbi, to introduce you to this final session. The title, at least that you gave us, you're welcome to stray from that anytime you want, is called Physically Distant but Socially Connected Lessons from the Midrash. As we proceed, if you can remain muted until we get to the questions and answers, and then we probably will do that informally. You can raise your hand, but I'll remind us when we get to that point. And so let's begin. Rabbi, it's all yours.
Thank you so much, Dennis. Coming at the end of this four-part series Mona and Dennis, I think, really thought of a couple of months ago when we were just at the beginning of this quarantine period, and we were trying to come up with more ideas for adult ed. And I really give, Dennis and Mona the credit for thinking of anything and thinking of this idea. The other presenters, I know each had their own sort of take on the idea of apart and together. And I want to just comment before I share a screen or a text with you. I want to just comment on the title. I had to come up with that title, I don't know, 6 weeks ago, 7 weeks ago, something like that. So I like the title, but the subtitle is going to go. Physically distant but socially connected is exactly what I do want to talk about. That's absolutely right. But there is basically no midrash in what we're doing. The more that I looked into it, the more I thought about it, the more I really reflected on the ideas. Midrash is just not where my mind went. So I have other texts for us, but it's not lessons from the Midrash. It's really lessons from Judaism. I would say. So that's number one. Number two, let me just talk about the idea, and then I will share a text with you. If there is any people in the world who know what it is like to be physically distant from each other and socially connected, it is the Jewish people. We take it for granted, and by we, I mean Jews, we take it for granted that this notion of being a part of a nation that is spread out all over the world, that's normal. That is not normal. When I speak with non-Jews, especially non-Jews who did not, say, grow up around Jews and don't really know anything about Judaism, when I talk to them about the sense of commitment that Jews have in general, let's say, Jews who are affiliated or connected in some way, to Jews all over the world, Jews they've never met, to Jewish communities, they honestly do not know how to relate to that idea. When I speak to them about how some members of our community and some members of my family who shall remain nameless, whenever they visit certain parts of the world, whenever they travel, they visit the Jewish community there. They visit the synagogue there, the kosher restaurant there, to feel a sense of connection, or maybe because a sense of connection already exists. They don't have to feel it, they just want to illustrate it, or they want to live in it and sort of breathe in that air for an evening, for a Shabbat. So if there's anyone who knows how to do this, it is us. And yet, right now, we are in the midst of an unbelievable, challenging, stressful, difficult time that maybe we have faced as Jews, certainly not in our lifetimes, but centuries ago. But it is a time that is challenging even our most sacred traditions and our most important institutions. So with that in mind, I'm going to share a text with you and go through a few main ideas that I have. And I think what Dennis said is that I should speak and then stop. Okay. And then stop for questions. Okay. Let me just ask you to start it. When do we want, is it like when do we want to be totally done? You're on mute, just to remind you.
I know, most people prefer it that way. We have been ending at around 9:30. So if you wanted to go for, say, 30 minutes, something along those lines. Yeah?
Perfect.
Okay.
Okay. So folks, I'm going to share my screen with you. That will mean that I won't be able to see all of your faces. So if I freeze and I just keep talking, please, someone who has my cell phone number, I don't know if Abby's still on the call, just text me and tell me. Or my parents are here, just someone text me and tell me to stop talking and wait till I unfreeze. Okay? If it's really boring, tell me that too. Well, maybe don't tell me that. You can keep that to yourself. All right. Here you have some text I put together. Physically distant and socially connected. I want to go over 5 different ways. I want to review with us 5 different ways that Jews who are physically distant from each other are socially connected or stay connected traditionally. And then I want to try and relate it to our own time, to this situation that we are living in now, because obviously all of this, these 4 sessions, are related to what we're doing now. Okay? So number 1, financial support. Right, let me just go through the 5 and then we'll go through each one. Financial support, meaning tzedakah. Number 2, actions speak louder than words. Pidyon shvuyim, redeeming captives, an example of helping complete strangers. Talk about that. C, number 3, we are one. Remember Federation UJA's motto from, 30 years ago, 25 years ago? We are one, feeling responsible for Jews all over the world. Number 4, our texts and our traditions bind us together. And number 5, shared historical experience. But because we have gone through experiences together, not experiences in our own lifetime, but we have within us the DNA of events from our past. Okay? And I don't mean actual physical DNA. I mean our psychological DNA. Let's talk about the financial. Okay, so those are the 5 ideas. Let's just start with the financial. I'm sure most, if not all of us, have experienced being asked to donate money to a cause that was far away, a Jewish cause. Most of us, certainly me, and I'm sure most of us, have had people knock on our doors, walk through the streets, see us and say, please give to this yeshiva in Eretz Israel, please give to this place, give to your fellow Jews, not here in Teaneck or here in Bergen County, wherever it is that you live, but far away. That is a general idea, but I want to talk about one specific idea that I just came across myself and that I think is really fascinating. The idea is a notion called pan-Judaism. So those of us who have seriously studied the history of the modern state of Israel remember well the notion of pan-Arabism, which was Nasser's notion in the 50s and 60s, that the Arab nations would join together, and which with, of course, him as the head of it. So there's a professor at University of California, Irvine, whose name is Matthias Lehman, who wrote a book about an incredible effort in the 18th century to support the poor Ashkenazi Jews in the land of Israel and Eretz Israel by the entire Sephardic diaspora. Now, just in terms of geographic area, we're talking about a huge number of thousands of miles across, right? All the way to modern day Iraq, Persian Jews, all the way to on the west of that, Morocco, all of North Africa, all of them were involved in this organized effort that was centered in Istanbul, in modern day Turkey, to support Ashkenazi Jews in the land of Israel. So I wanted to share with you a text from the introduction to that book, not because we're going to focus on that idea, but because for me, it illustrates this notion of feeling connected to Jews far away, who are nothing like me, by the way. If you're talking about 18th century Jews, Ashkenazi, poor Ashkenazi Jews living in Eretz Israel, and Sephardic Jews in the diaspora, they have very little in common, and yet they were connected. This is the first page of the introduction to that book. And I want to just get to a certain point. Okay, so this top paragraph just talks about the this network that existed, okay? And then here's the bottom paragraph. Suffering from a cycle of financial crises and political turmoil in the late 17th and early 18th centuries, the Jews of Palestine had little choice but to appeal to their co-religionists in the diaspora to come to their rescue. In the late 17th century, Jewish notables in Cairo and Venice took the lead, but it was the Pikidim in 18th century Istanbul, by which he means the clerks, the people who would go around and hold the little, they would organize this whole network of people with little pushkis, who succeeded in establishing a long-lasting and centralized philanthropic operation. So that's all I wanted to share with you. I want to talk about it because it's so odd. Why would a Jew in Morocco, who has in the 18th century, who has in all likelihood never in his life met a Jew outside of Morocco, let alone a Jew from another Sephardic country, let alone an Ashkenazi Jew? Why would this Jew in Morocco or this Jew in Istanbul give tzedakah to poor Ashkenazi Jews in Eretz Israel? They don't speak the same language. They don't pray from the same siddur. They don't have many of the same customs. And yet there is a feeling of connection that one group had for the other group that was illustrated by their desire to give tzedakah to support them. You could also argue that it had to do with dedication to Eretz Israel and sort of a sense of connection to those who made Aliyah, and that we need to support those who made Aliyah. But I think there is more to it. I think what is at the heart of that is this notion of feeling that we are part of the same people, which we'll get into in more detail later. Here it is expressed with money. Just to take us away from 18th century to the middle of the 20th century, after the founding of the State of Israel, what was one of David Ben-Gurion's most common destinations? As Prime Minister of Israel, he would come to the United States to get money. He would come to the United States and say, you, the wealthiest Jewish community in the history of the Jewish people, if you're not going to make Aliyah, you need to give us money. That idea was not, by the way, this is a separate topic, was not the first idea on his mind. He first wanted American Jews to make Aliyah, and American Jewish leaders, particularly Jacob Blaustein, who is the head of the American Jewish Committee, told him in no uncertain terms, you don't come and ask about Aliyah, and we will continue to give you money. If you ask our people to make Aliyah, you won't be welcome in our homes and in our synagogues. Sort of an amazing deal that they worked out. But again, that's a separate topic. Just tzedakah. Please give to Jews in another part of the world because they need your help, especially Jews in Eretz Israel. Before Medinat Israel existed, especially Jews in Eretz Israel. Dennis, you think we should go through all five and then open up for discussion?
Yes, I think we should, but keep your eye on that in the clock, so to speak. Yeah.
Got it. So, number 2, actions speak louder than words. Obviously, actions do speak louder than words. Remembering that great Ralph Waldo Emerson quote, "I can't hear what you're saying because your actions are shouting in my ears." It's a great quote, or it's a paraphrase. So what is Pidyon Shvuyim? Pidyon Shvuyim is redeeming captives. Now, this mitzvah of redeeming captives, and then I'll tell you what this has to do with our topic, goes all the way back to Abraham rescuing Lot in the book of Breshit. I think it's Genesis chapter 15. Right? That was the first instance of someone rescuing another. They weren't strangers. Obviously, Lot was Abraham's nephew. But throughout Jewish history, Jewish communities have deemed Pidyon Shvuyim, the redeeming of captives, literally, as being one of the most important mitzvot they can do. You see here, Rambam, we're just going to read the first few lines. Rambam in the 12th century wrote this about redeeming captives. The category is famine, drought, or exposure, and one stands in danger to one's life. So, and then he goes on to say just how serious it is. Let's just stop and let me explain how this worked in the Middle Ages. Because when you think of redeeming captives, you might be thinking of the state of Israel. Throughout the Middle Ages, meaning for hundreds and hundreds of years, Jews and other people, but Jews were taken hostage by someone, not because they wanted to hurt them, not because they had any ideological problem, most of the time, but simply because this was a way to earn a living. People figured correctly that the Jewish community would do whatever it could to redeem someone. So sometimes Jews would be held captive. Jews were very involved in international banking. Jews were very involved in international trade, and Jews were vulnerable. They would be taken captive, and Jewish communities would redeem them. The people who held them just wanted money. Again, most of the time, this was not ideological. This was not about Zionism or statehood or anything like that. This was just a way to earn a living. Not a very good way to earn a living, but a way to earn a living. Why would a Jewish community redeem a Jew who was a complete stranger? You can understand redeeming a Jew who was from your community, or obviously a family member. We can all understand that. But a complete stranger? Why? Why would you bother? Why would you give of your own hard-earned money or your community's hard-earned money, if there was a communal fund, to go and redeem a complete stranger who happens to be Jewish? Do we think, with no aspersions on my Christian neighbors and friends, do we think that of the 1 billion or so Christians in the world, that they would do that for each other? Or the 1 billion or so Muslims? I don't think that the same idea of connection to a complete stranger is present in the way that it is here, at least with this mitzvah. Not to say we're more moral or better, because I don't think that's true, but with this idea of connection to complete strangers, I think there is something profound there. So that's another piece of it. And another example of that, by the way, is sort of the story of Sodom and Gomorrah, where Abraham argues for the safety of complete strangers. He loses the argument in the end, but he bargains with God for complete strangers and his nephew Lot. Okay, what about this idea that we've heard in so many different fundraising campaigns? We are one. We Jews are responsible for Jews all over the world. How many of us, I know I have, how many of us have given to fundraising campaigns for Jews we would probably never meet, whether it was 1985 and it was Ethiopian Jews, or it was the late 1980s and it was the Soviet Jew, this Israel needed millions, or any other example that we can think of. Those are the two that first come to mind. I remember both of those. There is a notion, and we'll just look at the sort of Ur text, as Bible scholars say, the original text for it, that we Jews are responsible for each other all over the world, no matter what. We're responsible for each other. This is the text where that's talked about. And I don't want to spend the time going into it because that's not where our time should be spent tonight. But it's asking about a verse in the list of curses in the book of Vayikra, in the book of Leviticus. I remember we just read this a few weeks ago. And it talks about how one Jew, the verse says, isn't it written, you see here where I'm pointing? And they shall stumble one upon another. So what does that mean? They shall stumble one upon another. It means, I'll look over in the Hebrew, milamed, shekol Yisrael arevim ze bazeh. Hold on, my mother's calling me. Does that mean I'm frozen? All right. All Jews, kol Yisrael arevim ze bazeh. All Jews are responsible one for the other. What it means here in the context is that each of us should feel responsible for the other Jew's sin. That's what it means here, that we're going to be held liable for it and we should feel responsible for it. The way that it is used, though, in the Jewish world, certainly in the last 50 years or more, I'm sure, is that we are one nation. There was a time in our history when we all lived in one place in Eretz Israel, 2,700 years ago. Now we live all over the place, but we are all connected. Even if I'm an American citizen and the person sitting next to me is an Australian citizen and so on all over the world, we have a bond, we have a connection. And that means something. And it binds us together for good or for bad. And we have to deal with that. We have to live with that somehow. So we are physically separate, but spiritually connected if we buy into it. That's the great weakness of this, is that, I mean, for all of this only works if you believe it. Meaning, for Jews today, including many, many Jews in the United States, who do not feel connected to the Jewish community, all of these things that I'm saying don't register. They don't matter. They probably don't know about them. And if they knew about them, they don't feel that kind of connection. So it doesn't speak to them. So hold on to that. That is a big issue and a big challenge. We're going to come back to that. So that is that. Now, this one is one of my favorites. What connects us to Jews all over the place, even when we are geographically very distant from each other? It is our texts and our traditions. Let me just talk about traditions first, because I don't have a text about that. And then we'll read a beautiful text by Rabbi Soloveitchik. For many people, the idea that when you're, one of the core sort of strengths that comes from celebrating Jewish ritual is knowing that celebrating Jewish rituals, holidays, mitzvot, whatever it is, connects you both horizontally and vertically to Jews. What do I mean by that? I mean horizontally, meaning to Jews alive today all over the world. What I said before about Sephardic Jews, a Jew in Morocco and a Jew in Eretz Israel in the 18th century, how they don't use the same prayer book and they don't have some of the same customs, that was true then, and it's still true today. But I don't want to overplay that. Most of what is in those two different prayer books is the same. Not all of it, but 80%, let's say, is the same. Most of their prayers are the same. Not all of it, but a good amount. I used to daven one of the years when I was in Israel, I spent a number of Shabbatot davening in a Tunisian synagogue. We have family friends who lived on a Tunisian moshav, and when I went there for Shabbat, it was the only game in town, Tunisian synagogue. I was regularly completely lost. I had no idea what was going on. Not only is the prayer book different, but obviously the music is totally different. The rhythm is different. I mean, it's all different. And yet, every paragraph or so, I would find my place. And then I would get lost again. It didn't bother me, but I understood both that we were connected, my Tunisian friends and me, and we were different. And that was not a problem. It was okay. We had traditions that bound us together, even though we were drastically different from each other. Now let's read what Rabbi Soloveitchik says about text. I apologize, I do not have the exact citation where this is from. I found it in another source and that person didn't give it, so I just don't have it. Rabbi Soloveitchik, for those who don't know, one of the preeminent Orthodox rabbis and intellectuals in the Jewish world in the 20th century. He is still probably the most important rabbi in Orthodoxy today, at least in America. When I sit to learn, I find myself immediately in the fellowship of the sages of tradition. The relationship is personal. Maimonides is at my right, Rabbeinu Tam is at the left, Rashi sits at the head and explicates the text. Rabbeinu Tam objects, the Rambam decides, the Ravad attacks. They are all in my small room, sitting around my table. I think this is one of the most beautiful descriptions of what Jewish learning could be. Jewish learning, and Rabbi Gulenkin in our own day also describes it this way, is a way to interact with generations of Jews and to be a part of that tradition. To study a text through its various layers and its commentaries is to take part in a conversation that has been going on for thousands of years. That is extraordinary. But it is only extraordinary if you care enough to study the text. I know people, and I have had teachers for sure, who can sit in their study for hours and hours and hours at a time because they, honest to God, really and truly do not feel that they are alone. They feel that they are with the great scholars of our tradition, and they are speaking with them. That is an incredible idea. I just want to leave that for a second. I want to just pause and think about what Soloveitchik said, what Rav Soloveitchik said. When he studies, he hears those voices and he knows that he is not alone. Okay, let me end with this final idea, and then I have a couple of conclusions, and I'll stop right in time before 9:10. When we started, I gave the example of this notion of that we share historical memory. So I gave the example that even though I did not know Dennis before 2011, when my family and I moved to Teaneck, we can share certain historical memory. I don't mean memory in the sense that we were there, but memories in the sense of, as Jews, there's a common language and a common experience that we share. Now, I understand this is not true for everyone, and that's one of the fallacies of this argument, but I just want to put it out there that when you are speaking, when you have a certain sense of Jewish historical knowledge and a certain sense of the Jewish holidays, and you speak with someone else who shares that sense, it is as if you can speak shorthand with each other, because you can just trade back and forth. We can talk about events thousands of years ago that we feel a connection to. When I can talk with Dennis about revelation at Sinai, he doesn't know what I mean by that. Like, what do I actually believe? I don't know what he actually believes, but we can talk about the event. We can talk about the Holocaust, the expulsion from Spain. We can talk about leaving Egypt. These are seminal events that created and shaped the Jewish people, and they bind Jews together. One of the most interesting questions that adult converts ask is the following: Rabbi, how can I ever feel really a part of the Jewish people if I don't have these events in my background? Meaning my parents and my grandparents and great-grandparents, all the way back, I don't have that. How do I feel that I'm really a part of this nation? The answer is that as long as Jews have had converts, Judaism has said, once you convert, you are as Jewish as someone who can trace their ancestry back to Moses, Aaron, and Miriam. There is no difference. Rambam himself, in a response to a Jew to a convert who asked him, Rabbi, how can I say the blessing, Baruch atah Hashem Elokeinu, Elohei Avotenu, Elohei Avraham, Elohei Yitzchak, Elohei Yaakov. Blessed are you, Lord God, God of Abraham, God of Isaac, God of Jacob, God of my ancestors. That wasn't my ancestors. And Rambam says to him, yes, you converted, those were your ancestors. You're even holier than I am because you, like Abraham, chose to be Jewish. Unlike me, Rambam says, who was born to it. The text that I brought you about that was this great text from the story of the Ten Commandments, when it says that Israel camped at the foot of Mount Sinai, and it uses this singular verb for Israel as opposed to the plural. And Rashi says on this is from Rashi, Rashi says on this, Ki ish achad belev echad. As one man with one heart, all of Israel was united. What does it mean to have a people, a society who are really united and connected and who feel a sense of historical memory, a sense of connection to certain historical events? I think that is the great strength that Judaism brings to this current moment. And we know what that's like. We've been doing that for thousands of years. So 3 conclusions, and then I will stop talking. Number 1, Jews have a great deal of experience fostering a feeling of connection while we are geographically separated from each other. We do that all the time, and we've done that for thousands of years. However, many of the methods we've used over the millennia to accomplish these goals are difficult to use or difficult to implement during COVID. How can we accomplish these same goals, or maybe there are different goals now, using the methods we have available to us today? Whether it is text, it is ritual, it is this sense of historical memory, this sense that we know each other even if we don't know each other, or I know what you're thinking. How do we do this today? And I'll introduce another one that I did not list here, and then I will stop. What about the idea that is for sure a part of the Jewish people today without COVID, that for some of us, our realities are drastically different from Jews in other parts of the world? To take the most clear example, how connected can we feel to Jews in the state of Israel when our day-to-day living is so drastically different? When you are a sovereign Jew living in the state of Israel, when your kids are my kids' age, they're either in the army or they're preparing for the army. And my kids are going to college and they have no interest in going to the army. That's not on their radar screen. Are we really connected, or is that just not possible anymore? Because what connected us during our 2,000 years of exile, of a shared experience, is no longer the case. We come into this moment of COVID and of quarantine with a great deal of experience in moments like this, and yet with a great deal of trepidation, I think, about how to move forward.